Officer pulls over nurse for speeding, shocked to see his own son in the passenger seat. Imagine you're a nurse, rushing home after a long shift at the hospital, completely exhausted and trying to beat the clock to pick up your son. You glance at the speedometer and realize you're pushing the speed limit, but you're too focused on getting home to slow down. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights appear in your rearview mirror. Your heart races as you pull over, thinking to yourself, of all the days for this to happen, this is where our story begins, one that takes a completely unexpected turn. The officer steps out of his car, his face serious and professional, as he approaches your window. You're already fumbling for your license and registration, mentally, preparing yourself for the lecture you know is coming. You roll down the window, and before you can even get a word out, he asks in that unmistakable cop tone, "Do you know how fast you were going?" You nod apologetically, fully aware of the situation, but something about the officer's voice feels familiar, though you can't quite place it. What happens next completely shocks you. Just as you're about to respond, you hear a small voice from the back seat, the one that grounds you no matter how hectic life gets. "Mom, it's your son." You quickly glance back to reassure him, but before you can, you notice the officer's expression has changed. His eyes widen, and in a split second, his entire demeanor shifts from stern professionalism to something else entirely. Pure disbelief. For a moment, you think maybe you've seen this officer before. Maybe at a community event or the grocery store. But no, it's not you he's looking at. It's your son. The officer takes a step back, blinking as if he's seeing a ghost. He looks between you and your child, his jaw tightening, struggling to find the words. The tension in the air thickens, and you have no idea what's going on. Then, after what feels like an eternity, the officer says something that leaves you stunned. "Is that my son?" "Wait, what?" Your mind races, trying to process what you've just heard. How could this officer, this complete stranger standing in front of you, think that your son is his? You feel a rush of confusion and protectiveness all at once. Is this some kind of mistake? But the look on the officer's face tells you he's not mistaken. He's certain. Before you can respond, your son, innocent and oblivious to the tension, speaks up again. "Mom, who is he?" And that's when it hits you. This isn't just a random traffic stop. This is about to change everything you thought. You knew. The officer's face softens, but there's a storm of emotions swirling behind his eyes. Shock, sadness, confusion. He looks at you with a question burning in his mind, one he's desperate to have answered. But you're frozen, speechless, and unable to comprehend what's unfolding. As the silence stretches on, you're left wondering, how does this man know your son? Is this some kind of mistake? Or is there something more to your past that you haven't been told? And just like that, what started as a simple traffic stop has turned into something much deeper, something far more personal. You're left on the side of the road, trapped in this moment, with everything you thought you knew about your life suddenly thrown into question. But the real story is only just beginning. You sit there, gripping the steering wheel, still trying to make sense of the officer's shocking words. His son. How could that be? Your heart races as 100 thoughts flood your mind. Is this some bizarre misunderstanding? Your son, just 7 years old, looks confused and a little scared, glancing between you and the man in the uniform, who seems to know more than he's letting on. The officer takes a step closer, lowering his voice as if he's afraid of spooking you. "Ma'am," he says carefully, "I think we need to talk." His tone is no longer commanding. It's almost pleading. You glance at his badge, noting his name, Officer Jameson. The name doesn't ring a bell, but there's something in his eyes, something vaguely familiar. You shake your head, trying to clear your thoughts. What do you mean, your son? You finally manage to ask, your voice shaky but firm. This is my son. You must be mistaken. But Officer Jameson's expression doesn't change. He doesn't back down. I need you to hear me out, he says, his voice thick with emotion. I know this is going to sound unbelievable, but I need to explain. Your mind races back through the years, thinking about your son's birth, the day you held him for the first time, all the moments you've shared since. There was never any doubt that he was yours, your whole world. But the look on the officer's face is enough to make you wonder if there's a secret you don't know, something lurking in the shadows of your past. And then, the officer's words break through your thoughts like a sledgehammer. 7 years ago, I lost my son. Your heart skips a beat, and a wave of unease washes over you. Lost, you repeat, barely above a whisper. The word hangs in the air like a dark cloud. Officer Jameson nods, his eyes now filled with something between sorrow and desperation. He was just a baby, taken from me in the middle of a custody battle. I've been searching for him ever since. His gaze shifts to your son, and you can see the raw emotion in his eyes. It's not just shock, it's hope. The silence is deafening. You want to push back, to scream that this is impossible, but deep down, something in his story strikes a chord. You've always been open about your son's adoption. It was a private arrangement, but you never questioned it. You've raised him with nothing but love, never imagining that there could be more to his story. But now, doubts creep in. Could this officer really be telling the truth? Could your son, the little boy you've loved and cared for all these years, actually belong to someone else? You glance back at your son, still too young to understand the complexity of what's happening. His big brown eyes meet yours, and all you can think about is protecting him. You've built a life together, and the thought of losing him or sharing him with someone else is unbearable. Before you can respond, your phone buzzes in the cup holder. You glance at the screen. It's your best friend, someone who knows more about your life than anyone. You hit ignore, too overwhelmed to talk. But in that moment, you realize that you need answers. And not just from Officer Jameson. You need to dig into the past, the adoption, the papers, the people involved. You've never questioned any of it before, but now, you have no choice. I need proof, you say, your voice stronger now. If what you're saying is true, I need to see proof. You can't just come out of nowhere and claim, I know. Officer Jameson interrupts, his face somber. I don't expect you to take my word for it, but I have proof. A DNA test. It came back just 2 days ago. The results matched. That's why I'm here. That's why I had to find you. He pulls a folded piece of paper from his pocket. But you can't bring yourself to take it. Your pulse quickens, and the walls around you seem to close in. Could it really be true? Was your son's adoption not what it seemed? You'd always trusted the process, the lawyers, the agency. But now you wonder if there were things left unsaid, hidden in the fine print. The sound of approaching cars on the highway snaps you back to reality. You're still sitting on the side of the road, and the world is moving on around you, unaware of the bombshell that's just been dropped into your life. You take a deep breath, trying to steady yourself. I need time, you finally say, looking at Officer Jameson. He nods, understanding the weight of what he's just put on you. I'm not trying to take him away from you, he says softly, but I need to know him. He's my son too. The words hang in the air, and you feel the full weight of them. Could you share your son with a man you barely know? Could you open that door without tearing apart everything you've built? As the seconds tick by, You're faced with an impossible choice, but the answers will have to wait. For now, you're left with questions. Questions about your past, your future, and the fate of the boy you've loved since the day you became his mother. And as you drive away, with Officer Jameson watching in the rearview mirror, you know that life will never be the same again. As you drive away, your thoughts are a whirlwind of emotions. The highway feels like it's stretching out endlessly in front of you, while your son sits quietly in the back seat, unaware of the storm that's just begun. You glance at him in the rearview mirror, your heart heavy with the weight of the situation. How could everything you thought you knew about your life be upended in a single moment? The next few days are a blur. You can't stop thinking about Officer Jameson and his claim. The DNA test he mentioned. It lingers in your mind, and a part of you knows you need to confront the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. But fear of losing your son holds you back. You know that even if this man is telling the truth, it doesn't change the years of love and care you've given your boy. He's yours. And yet, the question remains, what if Jameson is right? Finally, after nights of restless sleep and countless conversations with your best friend, you decide to dig deeper. You pull out your son's adoption papers, rereading them with fresh eyes, looking for anything that might explain the situation. And that's when you notice something odd. A small detail you'd overlooked all these years. A name that links back to Officer Jameson. You feel your stomach drop. Could it be possible that his son really was lost in a custody dispute? That he was placed for adoption without his knowledge? The timeline lines up. The fear inside you grows, but so does the need for answers. You realize there's only one way to settle this, once and for all. A few days later, you meet Officer Jameson at a small coffee shop, neutral ground. He's already there, waiting nervously. And when you sit down across from him, the tension is palpable. He's holding the DNA results in his hands, but neither of you speaks for a moment. I don't want to disrupt your life, he says softly. I need to know the truth. You nod, your throat tight with emotion. I understand, you whisper. But whatever happens, I'm his mother. I won't let that change. With a heavy heart, you hand over the adoption papers, and together, you trace through the details. It becomes clear that mistakes were made. Legal oversights, a botched custody battle, a system that failed to keep families together. By the time you finish reading, the room feels heavier, and both of you sit in silence, realizing the complexity of the situation. Officer Jameson finally breaks the silence, his voice trembling. I just want to know him. I won't take him from you. I couldn't do that, but I lost so much time with him, and I just want a chance to be in his life. It's in that moment that you realize something. While your first instinct was to protect your son at all costs, you see the pain in Jameson's eyes. He's not here to take your son away. He's here to be a part of his life, to reclaim a piece of his heart that's been missing for years. And maybe, just maybe, that's something your son deserves too. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision you're about to make. We'll figure this out, you say, your voice steady. Together, the weeks that follow are filled with cautious steps, careful introductions, and slowly building trust. You watch as Officer Jameson meets your son for the first time, his hand shaking as he reaches out to say hello. Your son, with his innocent heart, accepts him without hesitation, unaware of the tangled web that brought them together. As the days pass, you find a strange sense of peace. The anxiety of losing your son fades, replaced by a new understanding. Family isn't just about biology. It's about love, care, and the bonds you build. And while you'll always be his mother, you realize that there's room in his life for more love, more support, The climax comes one sunny afternoon at the park, where the three of you sit on a bench, watching your son play. You exchange a look. With Officer Jameson, one of mutual respect and understanding. It hasn't been easy, and the road ahead will have its challenges. But you've come to a place where you both realize that this boy, this precious child, has room for both of you in his life. In the end, what started as a moment of shock on the side of the road has transformed into something deeper, a shared journey of healing, understanding, and the realization that love isn't limited. It grows, expands, and makes space for those who need it most. As you walk away from the park, holding your son's hand, you feel a sense of closure. Life is unpredictable, filled with twists and turns you never expect. But through it all, you've held on to the one thing that matters most, your love for your son. And now, with Officer Jameson quietly stepping into his role, your family has grown in a way you never saw coming. The story may have started with a speeding ticket, but it ends with the realization that family isn't defined by who we expect to be in our lives. It's made up of the people who show up and choose to stay.